Let's turn on the video. Yo. So as usual, if the microphone volume is a little bit low or anything, just let us know. Let me just have a look and see whether we can see people popping up. Yeah. Hey, cool. All right. That's a good start. Hey, Pete. How you doing? This is recorded, so you know we don't have to wait around for too long before we start, but we'll just give it a little bit of an easy start. Yeah, I've got a new microphone, so if the levels are a little bit weird, let me know. I can adjust them a little bit, make sure that everything's good. And it's a little bit different from normal for this one because rather than working on a collaboration which sort of runs, most of the things that I've been doing so far have been running in Unity. So what we would normally do for the demo is sort of put someone, myself or hey everyone, it's good to see everyone rocking up.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Like properly?
Look, yes, they can hear us. Yo. Oh, that's confusing.
It's almost like
yeah.
Dylan's sitting next to us.
Yeah.
You can't tell, we're actually 1.5 meters away from each other. It's just the camera
screen effect
pulls us closer together. Yeah.
Level's good. Okay, that's
Thanks,
great
John.
to hear. So most of the other projects have been running in Unity, and we just sort of put the headset on. So we've got the headset here, and we've got it set up in a slightly different way to normal, but you'll be able to see what's going on in the headset. But what this project has been is technically a little bit different. So we'll demonstrate it in a little bit of a different way. And let me get started now that we've got a few minutes into it and there seems to be some people here. So welcome, thank you for tuning in. This is our fourth live stream for our VR studio with the fantastic artist Louise Zhang.
Hey guys.
I have a spiel that I normally talk to, which is like that this is experimental and we're trying to figure things out. It's getting a little bit less experimental, but we always like, you know, there's some new elements every time. So there's always something to figure out how to make work, and a little bit of sort of wrangling technology one way or another. Yep, so if at any point in the process the sound cuts out or the video isn't working the way that it seems it should or something like that, just chime in the comments. We've got the comments up, we can see what people are saying. And also if you have any questions or anything, this is going to be a nice casual chat about the project. So if at any time you want to ask a question, just like throw it into the comments, and we'll might not immediately see it, but we'll get around to talking to that. This live stream format, so we're going to just to do a little bit of a demo of what the project is, a little bit deviating from the norm here, and I'll discuss that in a second. But yeah, any comments or suggestions or anything, throw them in the comment section. I'd like to acknowledge Australia Council for the funding for this project. It's helped support everything that's gone into it, so thank you so much for that. Yeah, we really benefited from having that support and allowing us to do these VR studios with these 9 artists. And I suppose I should say the other artists, if I can reel them off on the top of my head. So Grace Kingston, oh, what have I done to myself? Nick Cassie, Tarek Arlip, Chidam Ayadamir, Jason Fu, Claudia Nicholson, Louise, Kylie Banyard. There's so many. What's going on? John Gillies is here. Oh, how have I forgotten?
There's 9.
There's 9 of them. And this is
9?
a terrible thing that I've forgotten.
I think that's about right.
Okay, well, apologies too. It's been a long day. So there's going to be fantastic live stream projects of what we've done with those later on. All of these videos are archived. They're all recorded and they'll accessible via the Tactical Space Lab Facebook group, and also via the Tactical Space Lab website, which is tacticalspace.org. So yeah, they're all there. If you enjoy this, then go back and look at the other ones and like come along for the next ones to see what's going on. Okay, great. now all of that sort of the general housekeeping is out of the way, let me introduce Louise Zhang. I would say Louise Zhang has got a really awesome practice working originally, this is interesting, originally with an inspiration from body horror, and this idea of the abject and the attractive, this sort of the friction, the conflict between the two, but a sort of productive conflict between the two. But her practice has been moving away a little bit from the body horror. We originally, when we were talking about this project, we were talking sort of about some of the really gross out Houdini sort of things that you can do. So creating gross, weird materiality in Houdini. So
we were referencing a lot of Cronenberg movies as well, and like alien worldscapes where there's like these aliens that what's that game?
Oh, well, this is a very, very recent one. Half-Life Alyx has got some really awesome sort of blobby, alien
Slimy.
fungal sort of things that are gorgeous, gorgeously designed, and the aesthetic is really nice. But yeah.
We didn't quite move away from that in the sense of it always has a place in my work and my interests. But as I keep making work and figure things out, there's a lot more embracing of my own culture and religion, things like that. So it's kind of I think, is a really good demonstration of that transition between what I usually used to do in terms of body horror stuff, like the attractive versus the repulsive, and blobby forms of mutated bodies, transitioning into a more figuring where people like me belong. Yeah.
Cool. And I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to discuss that in more detail in a minute. I'm going to drop the backdrop and let's jump straight into it. So the reason why this is different is because instead of working in Unity, a lot of this stuff has been using HoudiniFX, which is a bit of effects software, a lot of actually kind of comfortable element of coding, a very sort of computer programmy sort of way of thinking about things, which was kind of fun for me to jump into, although a little bit of a nightmare of spending literally, I think the shortest render time that I had was 4 hours and the longest was 12 hours. So just a lot of throwing simulations at the computer and just waiting for it to do it. We can talk, it's kind of super fun as well, some of the things that you can do. So we can talk through that element and sort of what the back end of everything looks like at some point too. But mainly what we're going to talk about is I would just want to introduce you to the video that we've made for this project, and everyone can go and look at this. So as a VR outcome, what we've done, instead of having something that you have to be here or you can download for your headset, a VR video, I've rendered everything out as a 4K stereoscopic 360 video to YouTube, which means that you can look at it either with just a phone, iPad. If you've got a headset, like pretty much as far as I'm aware, all of the headsets support YouTube natively, so you can look at it in 3D if you've got a headset, or you can use Google Cardboard or whatever. And this is something that been interested in looking at as a way of presenting work that doesn't have the sort of technical barriers of needing to use the
especially
headset
during this time as well, and it's clickable.
Yeah. So this link I have posted to the Facebook group. Well, Louise posted it actually, and if you go onto this, then you will be able to follow along as we play our game. So you can come and have a look at it yourself and just sort of go through the different scenes. And yeah, it's interesting. I think it's an interesting way to go. It does mean that we don't have what's called the 6 degrees of freedom, so you can't sort of walk around and move in the space. But what you get is a nice 3D experience of these different spaces that I would encourage you to jump onto the link and have a look at yourself while we're talking through as well, because it's quite a nice experience. And if you do have a Samsung Gear VR or a Cardboard or a Quest or a Vive or whatever, you can follow that link and you can look at it in the headset in 3D. So it's a little bit, this is obviously just the 2D version, And what I can also do is we can have a look at it with the headset and you can see what we're looking at. It's going to look pretty similar to this, to be honest.
It looks similar on screen, but when you're actually in the headset, it's quite different. It's kind of if you've done VR before, it's kind of, how do you explain it? Because everything's so gooey and the mountains are so gooey. It's kind of like,
I'd say because it's all pre-rendered. Normally, when you're having an experience in VR, either it's running from the PC and the PC is sort of generating all of the visuals as you're going, or it's running from a headset. And if it's not something that's being sort of generated as it's going, it's a live action video. So something that's been recorded on a 360 camera or something. This is kind of interesting because it's like really crisp and has got very sort of physically accurate lighting and everything, but it's totally CGI. So it's kind of a nice aesthetic.
We're just lying to the world with CGI.
Yeah, it's great. It's lovely. It's really that with some of our posts when we were talking about like in Instagram about how magic it feels, it does feel pretty fun to sort of create something out of nowhere. So, all right, how about I jump into the experience and you talk through the world.
All right.
I'll turn on I think my microphone is on this one or not. Let me see. Okay, we can't, you'll just have to hear me from the audio here because of the way we're connecting, but let's turn side quest. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so I'll just jump into the video. The way we're looking at it is not through YouTube at the moment, just because it hasn't sort of updated on my account yet, but we'll get it. So I'm just loading the video from here. Do you want to sit where I was sitting?
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna just flip this to...
Okay. So I'm just running the video on this. Oops.
Okay.
Sort of sitting on the table.
Oh, we literally could have swapped seats.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, you're so much taller than me. Hold on. Okay, I'm gonna just have to squat. I'm short, but I'm tall on the inside.
That's all right.
So this is one of the smaller pagodas that we have on the side. I guess it's kind of a bit of a resting space, and then you can meditate with this blob that is an entity that is alive. And if you look at it closely, can you get back to the small pagoda?
Yeah, sure.
It's you can see it throbbing a bit if you just hold it there. Yeah, this was actually captured off one of the sculptures I've made. And same as this one as well, a real life sculpture that was then turned digital, and then we used Houdini to animate it to give it some pulsing feels to, I guess, give it the sense of it being alive, but also greeting you as you enter the temple. The Chinese characters at the top say 没关系, which means no worries, because this is a place of no worries. Yeah, and the banners on the side were of some actual works I've done as well, and Josh has rendered them beautifully, so they're flowing as though they would be on this gooey sludge mountain.
You can't see it, but there's amazingly rendered fabric material on that with little like
woven paws and yeah.
Yes, so I suppose I'll just go through all of these sections. All of these blobs here are animated. And all of them are scanned from Louise, from different works of Louise. Stuck those in, and then the final section is a little bit different, where Lou is sculpting in VR and on the iPad to create some shapes entirely from digital, within the digital realm, and then we worked to give them nice textures and things like that. So this scan of Lou's head we did a few days ago.
I'll show you the video later. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, we have all the documentation of both the scanning of the blobs themselves and also the head. Got the space, and then taking all of these blobs that Lou designed
This was sculpted via Sculptura, and a free app you can download on the iPad. And the concept behind this was that you enter through these series of temples that you are greeted by these entity sculptures, or these entity blobs. And the last temple, this temple, has my surname on top, Zhang, or Zhang.
Yeah.
That's my surname. And that particularly was inspired by the island that my family's from. My family's from an island in Wenzhou in the Zhejiang province called Qidu. It's very, very small, and thus it has many temples for different things, such as all the different surnames on the temple have their own, on the island have their own temple. So there's a Huang temple, a Cheng temple, and a Zhang temple. That's my family's temple. And so that was inspired by that. So once a year, all the Zhangs on the island will meet together in this temple and just celebrate and hang out and kind of get to know everyone on the island, because it is such a small island and it is largely the elderly or really, really young bubbas, because those in between generally have migrated elsewhere, mostly to Europe. So I have a lot of family in Italy and Spain for work, that they then send their income back to help the family on the island. But as we progress through this is the No Worries Temple, and then we're going to go through the Zhang Temple. Zhang Temple.
Yes.
There's a bit of I guess the vibe is kind of like Spirited Away, if you've seen it. That kind of mysterious, magical world that doesn't seem quite right, but all the blobs kind of still have some sort of humanness to them, in the sense of them being alive or throbbing or pulsing. Cool. So now we're in the Zhang Temple.
You want to talk about the Zhang Temple? Which way do you want to go?
Well, we're entering the Zhang Temple.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Okay, so once you've entered the Zhang Temple, you are in this cave, and the concept behind this, this is a sample of what it could be, but the concept behind this basically is where you can relieve your sins. So it's a confessional temple. Each time you walk in, you say a sin, like
Well, I feel like we should talk to the concept more than the thing for that, because I feel bad about it being a little bit deviated from what we were talking about.
Oh, okay. Sure. Swap seats?
Yeah, I can be on either. Well, I'll control.
No, you're a lot taller than I am, so.
Well, how does that work?
My butt is like it's basically hovering above your chair.
Yeah. Well, I can look at this. Maybe we can talk about the different spaces through here. Right? Okay. Yeah, this is a good way, Lenny.
That's a lot easier. Yeah. Okay. But you know, you guys got to feel on the VR headset.
People. Oh.
Oh,
Ooh.
dang! We didn't scroll down. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Cool. So a lot of the aesthetic was totally accidental. You know, we were trying to collaborate at a distance, which was sort of new to the way that we'd worked just for social distancing over the last few weeks. So a lot of the sort of back and forth communication and figuring out how things should look. The aesthetic was kind of an interesting. This whole back color thing happened pretty much by accident while I was doing some renders. A few things happened by accident and worked out really nicely. Like so that originally I was trying to produce just like a nice noise system on top of the mountain to make it look kind of mountainy, and then one little thing flipped and it looked great in the viewport, and then I had spent some time trying to get it to look great in the render as well. And then similarly, like the coloring of the temples and things like that, and what was a good aesthetic. I think we both knew that so these are actually pre pre-built assets that we got, so we could go on TurboSquid and find things and okay, this is
When you had
basically
2
something
weeks.
good. Yeah, well, I mean, like everyone does that. It's not. If anything needs changing, then it would be changed. But the option, the idea of sort of pulling it out of the original aesthetic, which was all colored and sort of trying to look still stylized, still sort of like rendered, but with an attempt at sort of terracotta tiling and stuff on the top. I think pretty much from the beginning we knew that we wanted to deviate from that aesthetic in the presentation of these spaces. And the initial discussion, so going from that body horror thing, was going to be something like scan some blobs, do some experiments with different ways of making them blobby in an interesting way. And give them some sort of internal life. Maybe which one's the best one for being up? Yeah, so use Houdini's sort of good thing of like creating weird blobby
Yes,
spaces.
Alex. The abstraction of diaspora rendered in the abstraction of VR.
Interesting.
God,
well,
you're so smart.
Yeah. Well, Lude does. I mean, like this always this thing about the pulling the sort of iconic or caricature sort of elements into spaces. Like, do you want? I mean, you could talk to how elements of Chinese cultural symbols are introduced into your banners and things.
Sure, well, these ones that we're looking at right now are abstracted forms of the scholar rock. And these were, the beginnings of these started in Beijing on a residency at the Institute for Provocation. While I was there, I visited the ginormous scholar rock garden in the Forbidden City. And I came back with the idea of, well, my perspective of them was actually turned out to be a very Western perspective of them. I saw them as almost lifelike, almost as though they were mutated bodies, obviously heavily influenced by my studies, writing about body horror. But when I went back to the residency headquarters and spoke to some of the people there who were local to Beijing, they were like, what's body horror? And how is this? I don't see how this is body horror. The origins of the scholar rock is not meant to be body horror. But I found that a really interesting, I guess, take on them. And it really literally was quite emerging of between, oh God, it's so corny, East meets West. So yeah, and I went with that, I continued with that idea of like, the scholar rocks are so heavily embedded in my culture that I don't fully understand, which is why I went on this residency to learn more about. But then my interpretations of these things that are from my culture are very highly influenced by my Western upbringing and Western education and interests. So these, what came about there, I didn't quite have a studio space there, and so I used a lot of digital programs to work with. So they're abstracted scholar rocks. Yeah.
We've just got a question. When sure,
yeah,
if you
essentially
wear a
my
VR
brother.
headset. Oh, so you don't need to wear a VR headset to look at this. You can just go onto the YouTube video and look around. So you can use your mouse, or if you're on a phone, you can just sort of point your phone in different directions to look around. If you do have a VR headset, then you can look at it in 3D. So if you see when I reload this, it shows up initially as one image above the other. One of those images is for the left eye, the other is for the right eye. YouTube just sorts it out once you start playing to figure out whether you're wearing a 3D headset or not. So it will accommodate wearing different headsets. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question of like to what degree this work is trying to. That was some of the discussion over the use of culturally sort of indexed architecture for this space, about like not. Oh, you're watching your stream. That's very meta of you at the same time.
I'm trying to post a comment to the link.
Okay.
but
Right,
I
so
actually watched
okay,
myself.
well I can do that from here.
Oh my god, I don't know how to start.
All right, that's good. I'll just post a comment to the link here.
I did it.
All right. Okay. No, the live stream. That's not working. That's funny.
It is streaming.
Yeah, but for some reason that's because all right. I will not be confused by that. Oh, we both did it. All right.
That's what true collaboration is like.
We don't need to both do it at the same time. Yeah, this sort of riffing on something. I mean, what is this world? What's the implicit narrative of this space? You know, like having a mountaintop temple is kind of nearly at the point of a caricature, sort of inscrutable Eastern experience, with shrouded in clouds and everything. And I suppose some of that element of your practice that might not be so much on the fore at the moment, that idea of the sort of like the attractive but sort of in some way, you know, all of these terrible terms like exotic and you know, the mystique and all, you know, like all of the thing of the whole of the East and this particular way of thinking, and you know, the connection to spirituality, a particular connection to spirituality of India and China and all this sort of thing in the mind of the Karens of the world. So like you know, it doesn't it's very much in the thick of it to be using these sort of tropes in what's going on, but it's kind of interesting to present these blobs, which are very much obviously a sort of fictional artifice of something. It's already a hybrid body. The blob, if you're going to talk about, John talks about hybrid bodies in the context of being a transplant patient and this sort of new productive.
This is the artist John A. Douglas.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, John A. Douglas. He's also I've worked with before and has got a fantastic practice. But you could say that these blobs are sort of a productive hybrid body that is symbolic of Lou's third culture kidness, is like what happens when you take.
When your parents are from one culture and you're born into another culture, you end up being stuck between these two cultures, and thus you end up creating your own culture, and that is the third culture, and it's a rising demographic around the world. So I personally identify as someone under the label of third culture, and I don't know why they call it third culture kid, but hey.
Because you've rather than third culture adult, everyone has to be a kid at some point.
Kid sounds better than adult.
Yeah, like they call them an army brat or a diplo brat is someone who's been brought up moving around because their parents are diplomats or in the army. I mean, it does feel there's something really nice emotionally that comes along with creating a fictional world in this particular way, which I think feels different from doing the stuff in Unity. I don't really know what the difference is, to be honest, but it feels different. It feels like creating some magical special
Well,
place.
It feels a bit more like I know it's digital, but it feels more like hands-on.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to say that the aesthetic convinces you more.
I'm going to say it does, just because I know how gooey they are.
I suppose. Yeah, I guess the difference, like I would like to think that in any experience there's an element of interpretation and in being complicit in understanding what your role is in being receptive to that thing. Like cinema, you understand what you need to do to be able to watch something and be part and get a rewarding experience of watching a movie. And some of that is suspension of disbelief. But there is something a little bit different with this, where it's like everything kind of looks like a real material when you're looking at it. I don't know, it's tough because wouldn't normally like to acknowledge that aesthetic bit so strongly about how it changes the experience. But let's say the materiality of the blobs is it looks like conjuring something that's got a particular reality to it, which is kind of nice.
But even the temple, though, where we strayed away from trying to essentially replicate actual temple with the tiles and the worn out concrete and bricking, and we went with this flat shiny patent black throwback to the emo days, to try and, I guess, give it a bit more of a otherworldly feel in contrast to this gooey landscape, but also avoid this, like, I struggled in creating a narrative for this because I work quite abstractly.
Oops.
And my work is abstract, though moving towards more what do you call it, non-abstractly. Figuratively. But there's something about creating a narrative that I wanted to move away from something that, like, a tree looks like a tree, or a temple looks like an exact replica of a temple. And so that black, which was Josh's idea, turned out great as well. So that was...
Well, the aesthetic also looks pretty good. Pretty happy with
Yeah.
it. Some of the experimentation is just like, what does... some element of this is an architectural practice in the setting this up. And there's something called an architectural promenade, which is where the buildings have been built in a certain way where it's a cinematographic way of looking at architecture. Where, for example, the Parthenon, as you're walking up the hill to get there, maybe I'm thinking. Anyway, that particular path that you went, when they were building the building, they were thinking of you walking up that path as a cinematographic experience, where your relationship and engagement with the building is shot through spatial composition that they can dictate. So with this sort of setup, it's like, okay, well, it's kind of nice in terms of an implicit narrative of the space. You have the climbing up the hill to reach the summit. And you've made it this far. I was thinking actually of another thing, we could have said Jayo at the top of this one, because it's like you've nearly made it up to the top of the hill, which is like
Jayo is
add
like
oil.
It's slang, and it's a very common use term. Jayo means to add oil, so it's like you can do it, yeah, get it, kind of thing. Yeah. So whenever you're off on a job interview or it's something, you're undertaking some task and you're like, I don't know if I can do this, crew behind you will be like, Jayo, you can do this. But we went with no worries though, because of the Zhang Temple of Sin, which we'll get to.
Yeah. So at this point in the pagoda, you've made it up the massive hill and you've sort of crested the clouds. And I spent a fair bit of time trying to position the pagoda and the camera within the pagoda so that you had both this sort of like opportunity to look at the view out over the clouds, and also have a nice framing of that view of the top of the peak and all of those buildings and everything. So it's like, it took a fair bit of time to try and sort of build the composition of that sort of thing. And then for this one, I mean, it's like just nicely framed. It's fairly straightforward, this one, but then you can sort of see that's straightforward, sort of making the space comprehensible. Also, I wanted to talk about one element of the inspiration for doing the pre-rendered videos is, okay, we're using Houdini. We're trying to make these things. I did a little bit of experimenting with bringing the simulated shapes into Unity so that we could do all of the hard work of simulating the blobbiness in Houdini and then put it into Unity so we could sort of walk around and experience it. In theory, we could have done that, but thinking about something where there's a heap of rendering involved and trying to give you a sense of moving through a space, I just thought of Myst, where they nearly didn't complete it because they spent so long trying to render it, and it was kind of nice to have this precedent with Myst as a way of moving through space and telling a story, which a lot of the story is like implicit. You should tell the
folks who don't play games what Myst is.
So Myst is like, when CD-ROMs first came out, Myst was the first game that really took advantage of the amount of space that you had, and it was very, very early CGI, rendered CGI. So, I mean, like, it's the equivalent amount of effort as this process here, I'd say. It's just that the results were sort of really let's find it.
It's a clickable game, adventure game.
Yeah, so Myst is still the worst game ever. Well, I'm not going to follow that link. What a terrible, curmudgeonly person. Okay, so this is Myst, and it took them ages and ages, and you could look around. I think it was like 8 different or 6 different directions or whatever you could look around. Game scholars say Myst was the first mistake of game studies, calling it a game. Well, that's fair enough.
Ouch.
We're not calling this a game. Yeah, I mean, like, what was there in it? It was a puzzle. There were puzzle elements to Myst but
I
it was
love
a
games
nightmare.
like Myst though.
Yeah, I'm gorgeous. I really loved Myst when I first played it, and that creation of atmosphere that was going on in it was really great. And a whole big storyline in the background. But I suppose that was something that we were sort of talking to, with the idea of doing heaps and heaps of rendering, and then moving through space. We should answer some questions.
Yes, we should. We've got quite a few, so let's scroll up and
what are people
check.
saying? I just
We haven't even
cleaned
gone
my
to the
glasses.
Sin Temple.
Yeah. What is everyone talking about?
I think
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Ainsley Wilcock.
Okay.
I love you.
The blob beings are all within a human scale, except maybe the purge blobs. Yeah, the sins are a little bit of a different scale, and some of that was just sort of the amount of time to experiment with the scale of the blobs. The sins. The blobs, the first 3 blobs pretty much are human scale. So if you, given that as well, if you read them a little bit differently if you're standing up when you're looking at it. The camera height is based on standing up. So if you're standing up, then this thing is about the same height as you, and it goes down to about sort of ankle length. So it's very much human scale. Do you feel like the way you perceive your blobs has changed since rendering them in VR? That's an interesting.
I do, Raina. I do. Well, the blob sculptures often are mistakenly seen as ceramics. They're not ceramic. They're made out of polyfoam, polyurethane, and resin. So I'm really influenced by, I guess I was and still is influenced by movie prop making. And so I use a lot of their materials to create these gooey blobs. And one of the things I tried to do is to create the idea that they were salivating or producing saliva. And so they were really moist, and you have these like droopy bits of frosty, I don't know, just think of something covered in saliva. Yeah, moist blob. But once we rendered them and then added the animation of it throbbing and stuff, it kind of extended that movement beyond. So rather than having something that evoked movement and transformation, we could literally move them and transform them. So that's pretty cool. Also seeing them right in front of you and being able to walk around them as well in VR really kind of screws you up a bit, but in a good way. Oh yeah.
So this is our original scan. I was just trying to get some of that blobbiness, some of those elements, which again, like what we're doing at the moment is just sort of making them blob out in different ways. I did want to explore sort of melting different bits of them, which is something that could happen in the future, I'm sure. Houdini has so many different things that you can do to make objects weird in different ways. I should do a call out to Sam Choi and Josh Mamet, who came in. Sam used a structured light scanner to help me scan one of the blobs, not this one. And so I can give some indication of how the scanning process went with make this. So I sort of used a turntable to try and get as many, because it's a bit reflective, a bit of a weird shape. So I took, I think, 1,000 images on the turntable. I made this automated little device to try and help to get that one. It worked out quite well. And then the other ones we used the structured light and all of that sort of stuff to try and get them into this shape. What other questions
From
do we have?
Alex.
Alex, I just watched Spirited Away with my little guy.
Mm.
And loved to heterogeneity, the asymmetrical and uncategorical nature of all of the figures in that story was the magic of it. And loved to heterogeneity. I didn't know that was a verb. Your blobs take that heterodoxy to its nth degree.
What does heterodoxy
It
mean?
means like being different,
Oh,
effectively.
thanks, Alex.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quirky,
Oh my god,
I
are you
suppose, is
saying
another
that
word
we're
that you could say.
quirkier than Spirited Away?
Wait, we have to wait 11 seconds for him
We
to
have to
reply,
wait
and we
for
have to
it.
scroll down to the bottom of the thing. Asymmetry. Yeah, I mean, like, obviously there's a composition to blobbiness. So, like, as I was talking about the spatial composition of the architecture. Yeah, you know, like this perfect connection to the Scholar Rocks. Like, Lou's blobs are not arbitrary in their shapes. It's like all of the
No
blobbiness
references to Scholar Rock forms.
Yeah. Well, and not just the shape being informed by Scholar Rocks, but Scholar Rocks have got, like, what is it, 6 properties of
They have so many properties, and I'm embarrassed to not know them all, but some of them are asymmetry, wetness as well, the moistness of it, how many orifices it has, and the sound when you tap them. But those kind of qualities is what is used to measure what is considered a good Scholar Rock.
Top Scholar Rock.
Top Scholar Rock.
Um,
all Scholar Rocks are. All rocks in general are top.
I remember talking to someone casually who was a tradie, and this is a segue, or actually just non sequitur. And at one point they said, "Step into my orifice" instead of "step into my office," and I thought that was really good, casual, amazing humor.
That's beautiful. That's something I'd say.
I loved it. I loved it so much without totally deadpan. It's good. This looks like a playable level. If that's something you're interested in, how would you go about that from a gameplay perspective? Well, you have to have an argument with. Oops. You have to have a. Sorry, the screen's just gone weird. I'm going to pretend like it hasn't, because I'm pretty sure everything is still running. Let me just reload to check. Yeah, everything's good. All right. Yeah, Peter Nelson, you can have an argument with Peter Nelson over the gaminess of it. There are things that you can do, like, in theory, even though all of this is like pre-rendered and all of the lighting and shadows and stuff, what you can do is do all of your simulation and try and figure out what things would do, like how the light would fall, and then you just bake it into a texture and throw it on top of simple objects. So you can get things to look really good by using Houdini and then putting it into other software. Saves you a bit, but some stuff is a bit hard to do, but you can sort of fake it. The temples were very well designed. Great attention to detail.
Thank you, Wenshul Gaga. They were not made by us, but we manipulated them.
We did manipulate them.
Brenton says,
oh, Brenton said it reminds me a bit of Myst. Yes, good call.
But and then Alex says, I remember Myst.
And
there's a whole discussion on Myst.
I think Kane responded when we talked about Myst. With the maybe not heart. Explicitly, maybe Kane doesn't love Myst. All right, you get Myst on your phone nowadays. Yes,
from
I know.
CD-ROM to an app you can
played
download.
It on my phone. It was kind of, I don't know. There are some amazing games. The biggest problem that still probably are great to play. The worst thing is, like, I can't put up with terrible interfaces anymore. Like, so you have to do the dumbest thing to try and get from A to B, and I just even though the game stories are great, I can't get my head around it. It was atmospheric. Okay.
Josh's rendering is beautiful, and it took him a really long time and many hours and many sleepless hours. So thank you.
There's still a little bit more to do, and patch up and bits and pieces. Do you want to talk to the?
We'll go through this.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Spirit me away, Zhang. Okay. All right. I think we've
got from Luke.
Where's Luke?
Luke Letourneau says the blobs often appear in abstract paintings, and within abstraction, what has been the experience of putting the blobs in such a not abstract landscape? Good question, because I really struggled with that, and it took us a lot longer to get to a point where it had a narrative feel, and that was a challenge set by Josh actually, which I'm quite grateful for. And then just talking about where my family's from and the landscape of Chido Island that is talked about previously, we came up with this narrative and the idea of being able to have a place that you can confess but not have any consequences, which we will get to. I promise we will get to.
Yeah, for sure. There's as well. It's an interesting question about how to. I had a good friend who, I don't know how to introduce this person. They wrote a paper early on when I was just sort of starting out looking at VR and AR. And they were an archaeologist. You know, in the US, when you do a PhD, you take two different disciplines and you sort of get good at both of them, and then you sort of smudge them together, kind of like a productive hybrid. And what they were doing was like, see what I did there. What they were doing was archaeology and VR, or like game modeling and stuff like that. And they were taking what used to be archaeological descriptions, fairly speculative, of sites of like a Roman fortress or whatever. And what you can do is in the prose just write it out. So these thick books describing everything that happened at these sites. You can talk about what you know and you can leave out what you don't know. But what they were doing at that point is going, oh well, we can communicate it instead of talking about it. We'll just build a 3D model of what we thought it looks like. But the problem is there's a concreteness to these 3D spaces. Really funny to talk about virtuality and reality and blah 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 and how everything works, but having these spaces, everything needs to be sort of concretely and explicitly laid out in a certain way. It's really hard to be gestural in that, because if you want something to appear to be gestural, it becomes much more theatrical in that process. Like you can't just say I want there to be a shape here and make it a blank box, because if it's a white box, it reads as a white box. Yes, we can go on. So it's a really interesting question of like, it doesn't have to be an explicit narrative in the 3D space, but there's no way to build something, like what's your scale to the world? Does that make you feel small? Does it make you feel big, powerful, afraid, vulnerable, blah, blah, blah? There's no way to even start to build a 3D space without there being an implicit narrative around it. Apparently that was a little rant. Would you create short narratives, walks through the spaces, standalone videos?
This from Jess Bradford.
Yes.
Yes, I would. Yes, I would. I'd love to create a series of short narratives / walk through the space as standalone videos. I think this project in particular has got me really, really excited in learning Houdini, ZBrush, all those kind of things, because it just allows me to expand from what I'm currently doing, as much as I do enjoy what I'm currently doing as well. But the idea of creating, I don't know, it just feels like the right medium to go into. Yeah. Another one from Jess. Working with the angles you mentioned earlier versus playable levels.
I think that's around the idea of making short narratives rather than having something where you can sort of just freely explore.
I kind of strayed away from wanting things to be interactive in the VR format though, where you like click on something and it does something kind of a sense, because I wanted to take that, forgive me, VR novelty out of it, which works for some platforms, but for my work it wasn't something that I wanted to explore, because I wanted it to be embraced as this space as opposed to having the interactive elements overtake the space.
That's exactly what Joan Ross was, the technical expression was cracking the shits over the fact that she was trying to communicate a particular implicit narrative in her space. And we put a couple of little bits of interaction in our VR studio experiment, and everyone fixated on just
the interactive bits of it, yeah,
without paying any attention. And it's like, like with the interactive, just adding interactivity to something, it's not being an artist to not think about what the consequences of that element of the medium are to the reading of the work, right? So Joan and I were able to sort of co-opt that sort of thing of interactivity into
Very well too.
the other work. But you can't just add something to it and expect it to a new technology, a new way of experiencing the work as something that you think is totally unchanges the base, and then just add something to it. It totally changes it, frames it in a different way. Technical question: how do you guys overcome the visual difference due to light?
This is from Wenshu.
When scanning, just heaps and heaps. So the material is really, really reflective.
It's shiny and slavery.
So that's why I took 1,000 photos.
Sorry.
Basically, it's because like if you take enough photos and there's enough shared detail between all of the different angles, then it can just kind of ignore the bits where it's all hot from the reflected light. And it worked. I wasn't sure it was going to work, to be honest, but it worked quite well. One thing that I did, which massively made I didn't even think about it until we arrived at that point, but rather than normally when you do a scan, so say you're doing a 3D scan of me, you take you build the shape and then you reproject the color from all of the different cameras onto it. So it actually has this sort of wrapped around texture applied to it. And when you do the texture mapping with these, you just get all the hot spots from the lights. So instead of doing that, we used a slightly different method, which makes it render. And then we added the reflectivity in afterwards through the material. And yeah. But yeah, it wasn't obvious that it was going to work necessarily. The temple structures are so formal as to be forbidding, but the blobs are completely inchoate. Another to this, creating a tension between cultural constraints and the object of that constraint. Yeah, well, that's an interesting one. That's kind of is this built into the work, and how do you think that affects agency, read gameplay, and potentially your work? Well, I'm not going to talk about agency and gameplay at the moment, but I'd say like this is post-structural analysis, Alex. What you're doing is reading in the tension between religion and
it's
what we've already identified.
Personal,
it might be there. And it might be something that if we spent longer thinking about it. It's interesting to say that the inchoate blob that we've already said is an index. You will appreciate the word, having had a gallery called Index Gallery. Index into Lou's hybridity as a third culture kid. And now you're saying that in the context of a forbidding temple context. I mean, obviously, it's great to say that the blob is inchoate, which means it's in a state of becoming.
That's good.
It's not fully formed.
I have used word heavily used in my honors paper.
Yeah, well, and Deleuze would love that. Everything's in a state of becoming.
But in a very direct sense of creating tension between cultural constraints and the object of that constraint. If you were here for the earlier stream, I spoke about the island that my family's from, Chido, having all the surnames had their own temples. Because my family is, half my family is largely Christian and very against anything that had supernatural or superstitious or folk lore in it, which is Chinese culture and history. I personally wasn't ever allowed into the Zhang temple, which bums me up. But I would, every single time I visit Chido, I would visit the Zhang temple and walk around it and try to like peek in. But I was never allowed inside it because they had incense lit and they were praying to gods, and that was considered the devil's work. So there is a lot of mediating between those two things. Yeah, those two. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good point. It's a bit like, what's that movie where Matt Damon is like, oh, you painted the boat on the stormy ocean. That means that you're in a loveless marriage.
Thanks.
Anyway, yeah. Peter Nelson asks Marie Alex's point and discussion on interaction. There's a nice paper on interactivity. The basic point is that interactivity that does not allow you to make your own fun ends up disappointingly a disappointing distraction, giving the illusion of freedom whilst only letting you fulfill the artist's vision. Well, you could say that illusion of freedom that ultimately ends up being a frustrating barrier is a work that you can play with yourself. This is why artists need to be engaged with their medium. Like, if that's the message that if you want to communicate to people what it feels like to have the illusion, like capitalism, for example, the illusion to make XYZ choices and to have a certain amount of freedom, and then come up against the limits of that freedom, then an interactive game where you can't do everything is a really good, where it's not a sandbox, is a really nice way of doing it. At the same time, like, a lot of what I was looking at with the use of technology was how it's almost our ability to co-opt things is, let's say, functionally limitless. Like, there's nothing that you can't co-opt. Any game, that I've talked to people about, indigenous VR experiences and how you get informed consent from people to be part of your project. And you say, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to scan you or your country, or we're going to record your story and blah, 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 and put it into this. And it's going to be very respectful. And you're going to look at the final version and you can say yay or nay and make consultation over whether you think it's appropriate or not. But we have absolutely no control over whether someone else will come in later on. Maybe they'll hack the game and totally create a different narrative, or maybe they'll just twist it in a little bit. They'll just like do a narrative over the top of it that totally changes the meaning, or they'll find a bug in the game that allows them to do something, or you put it into a game engine and they manage to kill people, or something like that. It's like the extent to which people can co-opt what you're trying to do is enormous, and it's very difficult to from both sides. In some ways it's inspiring, and in the digital rights management hacking sort of like cracked software sort of chase. In some ways it's inspiring. In other ways you have to be very careful about what you put out into the digital realm, being aware of where it can go. Cool. All right. Well, let's go to the.
When Shul says, I would go in and have a look. Yes, can we please go in and have a look?
Yeah. There it is.
So are you able to play it so we can see the blobs falling out of my mouth?
Yeah, I'll do it in the headset.
Awesome. So this is the Zhang Temple, my version of the Zhang Temple, and it's basically a place where we're hoping, if we had more time, people were able to send in what their sins are. So it's a bit like a confessions booth, and that your sin will then kind of generate into one of these blobs, and they will come out of my mouth. And this temple essentially consumes sins in the form of these blob entities. And so hoping you can see that in action via Josh.
You can see that.
Yeah, just a couple of sins we made up earlier. So if you can imagine this just kind of filling up and this space being engorged with these blobs of various textures and forms depending on the sins, and then you leave this space, so you leave the Zhang temple, then you enter the No Worries temple, and you're set. Perhaps a reflection of my own guilt that I don't wish on anyone. Yes, we wanted it to look kind of gross too. But blobs, yeah.
Yes.
Do you want to point to the mouth so you can see them coming out of the mouth?
Because it took 4 hours to try and get them to fall out in the right.
For a 6-second tumble of a sin blob, it takes 4 hours to render. So you can count how many hours it is as the sins are popping out. We went through numerous of ideas of how to present this, and one of them was having them kind of above you. So when you walk into this space, and then there's this abyss above you, and you just kind of speak to this space, and this blob will fall down and then bounce and roll, and it's captured there. But we went with the rock stone render of my face because it feel like pooping.
What? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Gross. It's just Bradford. What have we missed? I'll go and repeat it. Do you remember what?
Thanks, Dill.
Who wrote it? And
let's show them the video.
Why don't I have the video? Because I don't. We'll in all of the work in progressy sort of stuff. So Office Dog is making all of the documentation for everything.
Thank you, Office Dog.
They're sort of going through, and they've got all this progress and process documentation, and at the end of everything, they'll make it all look professional and brilliant and amazing. I can show you the scan, I think. Which one is it?
Well, Josh goes and finds that. Kane says,
Yeah,
there is something so soothing about the blobs coming out because it's like doing a shit, Kane. That's why.
Yeah.
This is
That's great.
I was lying on the floor. We've tried different ways of like me standing up, but I couldn't keep my mouth open long enough to take bajillion photos without quivering my mouth. So Dill, my partner, came up with the idea of lying down on the ground, and Josh drew all these X's on my face and then turned it into that.
The magic of photogrammetry. So this is, in terms of the process, you start with a heap of cameras and it looks at them all and figures out
those are all the images.
That's me with the camera going dug, 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 all the way around. And that does this point to figure out what it's actually looking at. And then you do a dense point cloud with some ridiculous number of millions, 5 million points. And then a little bit noisy, but you do. And then you build the final model from there. Yeah, it's good fun. It's all good fun. What is everyone saying?
They're talking about paper.
Oh, great. Yeah, it's just a reading group in here. Sorry for the crazy link. Okay, good stuff. If anyone's interested, I'll show Houdini, I suppose. It's kind of fun. The sort of process that you go to create things is one that I've become absolutely familiar with over the last few weeks. So it's all procedural. You throw in an object, you muck around with the object. So let's say, what process did it take to what process does it take to go through and make this blob move? I wonder if I can do this in a comprehensible way at all. Okay, so we start with our import blob. Go back here. We start with our input blob. It's super high resolution. All of these nodes, so all of these different components talk to each other, and then there's solvers and all sorts of bits. So we start with our input node. We just make it reduced size. So it's not so huge. Oh. I'll go from there. Okay, let's see what we can look at. So there it is at a slightly lower number of polygons. You can sort of see the polygons there. If I turn, so there's the polygons.
That's so hot.
And then once you've got it into that stage, you're in a position to simulate it without it taking too long. And then what I do, I'm using a system called Vellum, which is a way of simulating cloth surfaces. And I just add a couple of constraints to it. So it's like, okay, well, look at the constraints. I want it to act like a material. So all the different points I want to hold tight to each other with some element of some degree of constraints to how much it bends and how much it stretches. And what I do to make it blob in a weird way is create a bunch of noise on the surface that I can then animate. So this is called Perlin noise. This is like 3D noise. And if I'll just turn off the brain so it doesn't have to think about anything. This is what it's doing. So I take the original object and I go, okay, I'm just going to create some arbitrary property on the surface that goes between two different values. And then I pipe that value into the simulator being told to compress the blue bits and expand the red bits. So as it plays, you have all of these hot and cold spots, and the simulator just tries and make it fit to expanding out the red bits and contracting the blue bits. So that's the visualization without it moving. If we look at the final simulation, so once it's actually run through, that's what it looks like. So that's it. Once it's done the simulation of trying to get the expandy bits and the contracty bits. And then finally you take that low poly version, you sort of compare that to the original and put the high poly over the top so that the final thing is the high poly blobbing around, which is nice. It takes a little bit longer to run because it has to keep on sort of taking the high poly and fitting it to the low poly. That's awesome. What beer are you drinking? Fat Yak. They didn't sponsor us. I don't know why they're getting free advertising. I'll have to blur that out at some point.
Jess Bradford asks, will you add more temples and spaces eventually? I'd love to, and I've spoken to Josh about this, and I'd love to be able to secure some funding so we can expand this because it's extremely exciting to do. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
It's good. Yeah, I mean, it would be great to get funding for the stuff we've already done. It's yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. You know, in the last couple of weeks, I've learned a level of Houdini skill, which if I ever stuck with one thing, would give me a lifelong career as a HoudiniFX artist.
And my mentor.
So if anyone wants Houdini stuff done, then, you know, like, let's render some blobs or some non-blobs, some other things.
Oh, it's not blob exclusive.
Render
we invite all.
Yeah, it's all good fun. So here's a scene. Dug, dug, dug. The cute little background space. Little things. Yeah. What else to show in there? It's all good. Sorry? Ooh. All right, well, let me see what else. What have we done? Have we talked about the what? Yes, we've described it. Have we talked about the why? Have we talked about the why?
The why? I thought we did talk about the why with me talking about my family's religious war against each other.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. I'll take that off then. How we've talked about the process. Now? Why now? Why did we do it now? Because this is what we got.
Because thank you, Ozco.
Yeah.
For last year.
Okay, so we're wrapping up, I think. And if you have any questions or comments or anything that you want us to go through, now's a good time to remind you that
quick, you've only got 2 minutes. We've got a lot of beer to drink.
Yeah. So you can have a look at this. I may update it just to some tweaks and render bits. And I've got a couple of little sort of isolated out animations of blobs doing interesting things for Instagram and things like that. So I'll post that in the next few
we did
days.
make a series of GIFs as well, or GIFs if you like, as well, which I'll share throughout the coming days.
You can put them on this website if you want.
We are going to be putting them on this website, Josh.
Yeah, good.
So yeah, we'll link it on the Tactical Space Lab Facebook page, Instagram, and website, which is... That's your go.
Tacticalspace.org. Hello. Yeah, it's great to have you on board, Pete.
Stay safe.
Yeah.
Stay safe, everyone, and thank you. Thank you, Josh.
That's all right. I could give them a few more moments if they want to have a. Did we miss anything? Whole discussion. A bit of a weird point to say a big hello, Pete, because normally it would be like the big goodbye at the end and the hello at the beginning. But that's all right. Cool.
This is the world we live in now, guys.
Cool. Well, I'm glad everyone enjoyed it. And just what have I got to do for my housekeeping at the end of it? Okay. Remember that this is one of a bunch of different VR studios. All of the ones that have come beforehand, Grace Kingston, Nick Cassie, and Tarek Arlip, are archived and already on the Facebook page. And there'll be more to come. So if you haven't already, like the Facebook group, and you'll get updates on when our next projects are. The next artist is John Gillies. We're going to be working with live video and performers and things like that. And doing some interesting, probably going to try. I've got a 360 VR camera that we can have a go at trying to comp in some CGI elements, some maybe elements of interactive theater. It'd be quite fun. Yes. Okay, cool. Thanks so much for joining us.
And thank you for your support and checking it out and leaving all these comments. And I'm loving the talking to each other and engaging with each other as well. I really, really enjoyed the behind the scenes aspects of this, working with Josh, because it was an actual collaboration. We've worked together before, but this felt like an actual collaboration.
Get the things.
Speaking of, this is one of the previous collabs we've done.
Yeah. So
in person. What? A 3D printed blob that is generated? Oh, wow.
So this is, I suppose, like a conceptual preemptive bit to this, where I was using not Houdini, but Grasshopper, which is a procedural architecture bit of software to try and come up with. So I didn't model this shape. I made a system that comes up with heaps of them.
Oh my God.
A system that tries to come up with interesting shapes. So I ran it through a bunch of times and it made, and then we printed them in colored 3D printer, colored resin, so that as it started at the bottom it changed colors and created these nice sort of like Louise Zhang color palettes. Don't know if you can fully appreciate, but yeah. This is an extension of that sort of procedural blobby trying to come up with things.
It's been pretty sick collaborating with Josh. But as I was saying, I really enjoy the behind the scenes aspects of it, to getting it to this stage. So I look forward to sharing all those behind the scenes combos and sketches with you guys as well.
It's true. There's some fun stuff. All right.
Thank you.
Take it easy. Stay safe.
Stay safe.